when you talk about security, there was a traditional paradigm of security, the object of which was the state. And there were very traditional tools and instruments and institutions for that. But then back in 1993, the Human Development Report came, and which coined the concept of human security. And you've just alluded to that rightly. There are deep interlinkages between state and human security. And according to the 1993 report, there were seven dimensions of human security articulated in that report. Complex interdependencies between these 7 dimensions and state security. Just to illustrate that with an example, we can appreciate what insecurity and energy insecurity do for overall economic insecurity. That has implications for poverty and deprivation, which in turn has a causal linkage with conflict and violence in a society, and there is a negative vicious cycle which can play out as a result of this. So there are deep interlinkages, and in today's day and age, it is extremely difficult to extricate state security from human security because of the complex interdependencies. But I think that if the 1993 paradigm of human security was to be revisited again, there would be 2 things that would need to be added. One is environmental security, and my cabinet colleague Malik Amin will elaborate on why that is the case. And the other is health security with a specific emphasis with regard to whatever we see playing out today. And of course, my other cabinet colleague, I expect, will talk about that. There is a third element of demographic security, which is not factored well in that report. Sitting in Pakistan, 5th largest in population terms country in the world, we now deeply appreciate that population is a denominator for development, just as the environmental outcomes are a denominator for development. So I think that the human security paradigm articulated and forged and firmed up in 1993 will have to be revisited in the post-COVID context. And I think human security, whether you refer to it as human security or human development or human capital formation and development, are deeply important in today's day and age, where technology is defining our future. And it is very well recognized that 60% of the wealth of a nation is dependent on its human capital as opposed to its physical and natural capital. And some thought leaders and institutions go as far as saying that as soon as 2025, the borrowing costs of countries will be linked to their human capital rankings. So salient is it for the progress of a nation. So I don't want to blow the trumpet of our government here, but I just want to bring to bear some facts. Our government was very conscious of the fact that human security and human capital formation have to be squarely positioned in the national agenda. And therefore, the Prime Minister, in his opening speech, talked about his commitment to the welfare of people, which you see playing out 2.5 years down the line. The HSAS program was conceptualized, a wide-ranging welfare program. At inception, it had 115 elements. Today, we stand at 268. 34 executing agencies, the biggest social welfare budget, 7 time-bound outcome-based goals, and we had to spend a whole year developing the institutional infrastructure for that. The digital infrastructure, which you saw being utilized and playing out during COVID, and of course we had to establish a new governance paradigm to uphold integrity and transparency in the utilization of funds, and I can go on and on with the preparations that we did. But as we were firming up the arrangements of SARS, COVID struck. And I think that our country had a bit of a head start because we had invested in the digital infrastructure and in the institutional infrastructure, which enabled us to respond very quickly.
I think we are in the happy position today of talking about security beyond a conventional or a territorial security perspective, and talking about it in the backdrop of COVID-19 actually provides us some advantages. And first and foremost of which is the fact that I don't think there's anybody alive today who's not been living under a rock who does not realize the fundamental and central importance of general human development, well-being, safety, security, and of course, especially in the context of health and well-being. Now, in Pakistan's case, one of the most important things and one of the most central tenets of our response was inclusivity and a focus and target towards protection of those that needed most. There was a tendency or a temptation, I should say, of rushing to somewhat narrower ideas of how to control the pandemic. But I think the tone was set by the government, by the Prime Minister himself, in which front center stage was the average Pakistani citizen. And so this nuanced approach, which really then got various names from all the way from smart lockdowns to this and that, essentially was that while we battle the pandemic, while we strive to protect people, let us not just protect them from the pandemic, but also make sure that what was coming as a consequence of our corrective actions or our restrictions did not indeed wipe out some of the gains that you were going to make from the pandemic control. And these included not just in the economic domain or in monetary terms, but well into how it impacted public health, access to health, prevention, our programs, and so forth. So this was the total backdrop. Now, specific actions within it were very crucial. We all talked about a whole of the government response, about everybody coming together, coherence, coordination, the NCOC. All that is good. But I think it was targeted not just for coherence of action, but for actions that actually had impacts that transcended social boundaries, social barriers, geography, and style of living, etc. So this coherence was first and foremost. The second bit, I think, that defined our response for the pandemic was the fact that for once, our decisions at a government level were driven by direct statistical facts, by epidemic responses. So all around the globe, we saw that there was, at times in advanced and developed countries, we saw some incoherence and some disagreements and difficulties. But at least in Pakistan, we were able to cobble together a coherent response that was data-driven, based on information, based on scientific information, which was not just nuanced, but also flexible and responsive. So I think that was the second bit that was crucially important. The third part was the ability to not just coordinate detection or disease or analysis and throwing out recommendations, but the ability to actually reach out to provincial entities despite an 18th Amendment scenario, to be able to have a coherent preparation for the pandemic and what was to come and so forth. And the next bit was even more important, which was to enable longevity to this process. It is quite okay to be able to build a response or to cobble together a response in real time, but to be able to ensure that it actually sustains, not only during the present cycles and waves of the pandemic, but to be able to be prepared for future threats and future risks that come along. So in line with that, the government's healthcare reform agenda is solidly along the lines of what is the usual playbook for this. So first and foremost, the access to care. And one of the things that, and so looking beyond a little bit the epidemic part of it, but to actually general health in perspective. So what destroys a lot of households and trips them over into poverty, into becoming recipients for SRs and such initiatives, very often is catastrophic health expenses. And so this whole Sehat card idea, nothing new, but the implementation, and it's across the board implementation, and as it's growing, is crucial as one of the pillars. So access to care. There are other bits to it, but we perhaps, if there is interest, we'll talk about it. The second important bit out of all this has been to ensure that the HR, the manpower that is created and generated to take care of those that require help and health is of sufficient numbers and of sufficient quality. So therefore, the reform of the regulating entities within Pakistan, the Pakistan Medical Commission, the Pakistan Nursing Council, and other such regulators is not only on the cards, is already partially underway.
I personally believe that in the 21st century, we cannot think of human security without climate security. This is probably on top of the list of most countries now in terms of protecting their humanity. In Pakistan, we are feeling it and we are living through that paradigm much more than other countries. We are a country which is not a big contributor to this problem. We didn't create it. I mean, we are 135th even today on the list of countries who are contributing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. We are less than 1% in terms of the quantum of greenhouse gases put in the air. But we are number 8th on the list of countries most vulnerable to climate change. We have been facing impacts for the last decade and a half. And this year there was a special categorization done of only 3 countries in the world which have been constantly on the top 10 list of most vulnerable countries. And Pakistan happens to be one of those 3 countries. So this is a problem which is not of our making, but which we will have to deal with and which our next generations will have to deal with. And I'll just take a minute to tell you why that issue is there. It has to do with our topography and our geography. Topographically, Pakistan is a country which has got the 2nd highest point in the world, K2, and then we go down within 2,000 kilometers to the sea level. So within those 2,000 kilometers, we've got 12 ecological zones, which is a gift of God because no other country in the world has those 12 ecological zones. But geographically, the problem is that on top of that, longitudinal line, we've got the 3rd pole of the world sitting. The water towers of the world are there in the north of Pakistan, and the 3 main mountain ranges have got the glaciers which feed us, but which are also now a threat because of climate change. And what happens is that if you have too much water flowing through Pakistan, it's a longitudinal country, there's one big artery of the Indus, that is a problem. And if you have too little water flowing through Pakistan, that becomes a problem because of drought. So this topography and geography is not going to change in Pakistan. So climate change is an issue of our national security which is here to stay. It has got dimensions much wider than the environment. It has got economic dimensions because when we deal with the issues of climate change, there's a price to pay for that. And the price tag that has been estimated is about 3 to 4% of our GDP gets shaved away when Pakistan faces these impacts. It is an issue of water security because all of it has to do with the glacier in the north and the monsoons which are also shifting because of climate change, and all of that comes down as water in Pakistan. It's almost 90% of the water that we have is seriously impacted with climate change.
It gives me great pleasure to share my thoughts with you at this session of Islamabad Dialogue. This is a laudable initiative. I appreciate all those who have contributed to putting it together. What I have in mind for this interaction today is to briefly scan the global and regional landscape and to outline Pakistan's vision for peace and socio-economic development within that perspective. Clearly, the world is going through profound transformation. Indeed, this is another pivotal, defining moment in history. New security partnerships are being forged. Old alliances are being reinforced and even fortified. Policies of containment are once again ascendant, perhaps sowing the seeds of a new Cold War. During the past few years, the world witnessed renewed competition, accentuating rivalries and even a drift towards confrontation. Globalization and multilateralism were severely undermined by unilateralism and sharpening geopolitical tensions. Major power competition has become distinct. The mix of old and new conflicts and disputes is threatening peace and security in different parts of the world. Amidst this complex global dynamics, threats are being magnified by some in order to justify their relentless arms buildups and hegemonic designs. Geographical and maritime borders are being redefined to advance motivated geostrategic agendas. Alliance building and military dominance through power projection are taking shape. The misplaced notion of net security provider is being applied in our own region in disregard to the legitimate security interests of others. The cardinal principle of equal and undiminished security for all states is being undermined. New and emerging technologies are being weaponized at breakneck speed. Warfare is being fundamentally transformed due to these disruptive technologies. Yesterday's science fiction is becoming today's reality. Frontiers are being constantly pushed in the outer space, cyberspace, and in the domain of artificial intelligence. Disinformation and fake news is being spread as tools of statecraft. Terrorism in Pakistan has been actively sponsored, aided, and abetted